Hello and welcome back to another episode of Put It On the Table. I'm Jason, this is Justin, and we have more questions and crazy stuff to talk about. We've been talking about the death penalty. What are we going to do? We're going to
put it on the table.
That is unbelievable.
I know.
All right. So, we've been talking about the death penalty for the last few episodes, and we're taking that off the table.
It's gone.
It's gone, unless we talk about it again, in which case I'm going to have to pick those up and put them back on the table. But for now, what have you got for me?
So yeah, I guess now we're going to swerve a little bit too. Also some more current events, but look sort of outside of America and sort of look at like what's happening around the world and sort of affecting us. And sort of like I'm hearing a lot on the news sort of about like the refugee crisis coming out of Syria and the Middle East. And I was just wondering if you could sort of like fill us in a little bit on sort of like what has happened, what's going on, and then also, you know, largely like how can we approach that from the Bible.
Okay, so I will try to make the description brief because in order to understand the Syrian refugee crisis, you have to understand some things that happened before the Syrian refugee crisis. You got to go back to December of 2010. So a fruit vendor set himself on fire in front of a Tunisian government building because he was publicly humiliated by a police officer. So from there, the Tunisian president steps down, and the Arab Spring started. Now, that was spread across the Middle East and was met with mixed success in various countries. This included Syria. Now, in Syria, what began as peaceful protests were met with extreme force from the government, and the situation very quickly dissolved into civil war in 2011. So in April of that year, the refugee crisis began. People were fleeing brutal fighting to largely Lebanon. As the fighting spread northwest, by June, many refugees started moving to Turkey. By 2012, countries all around Syria, but particularly Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, were trying to help the refugees. However, violence and disease was following them throughout the Middle East. So by March of 2013, there were over 1 million Syrian refugees registered or assisted.
Wow.
By September of 2013, there were 2 million, and half of them were children.
Wow.
So by the end of 2013, it was clear that war was spreading to Lebanon from the Syrian civil war. In October, 16 countries made confirmed pledges to resettle refugees. Australia, Austria, Canada, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Ireland, Luxembourg, Moldova, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. This represented over 10,000 refugees, and an open-ended number in the United States. We never said exactly how many we were going to take. So, beginning in 2014, the UK also joined that agreement. In April of 2014, there were 1 million refugees in Lebanon alone. Wow. So, 1 in every 5 people in Lebanon was a refugee.
Wow.
Yeah, and so because there were so many people now just migrating in there, polio began to spread, actually. Wow. And then in June of 2014, ISIS began to rise and displaced more than 1 million people in Iraq.
Wow.
So by September, ISIS prominence led to a huge influx of refugees into Turkey, which by October prompted a siege of a northern Syrian city. ISIS actually attacked a northern Syrian city because it was a pathway for people to escape to Turkey. And which Turkey did fend them off, by the way. So that ISIS at the time had nowhere near the fighting ability to fight Turkey, as well as Turkey's allies. There was
Turkey's already a very powerful country.
Yes, and NATO in general was stepping in to assist.
Yeah.
So, however, by 2015, ISIS was in control of 50% of Syria.
Wow.
And the displaced population of the world had reached an all-time historical high of 59.5 million people.
59?
59.5 million.
Wow.
1 in every 122 people was a refugee, internally displaced, or seeking asylum.
Wow.
By August, of 2015, Germany was the only country to open its doors to Syrian asylum seekers. So Greece, Hungary, Bulgaria, and a number of other countries actually conducted operations, military operations, to keep them out, or built walls to keep them out. Trump was not the first one to decide to build walls. And many refugees just started returning to Syria because everywhere else was just as bad. And by November of 2015, the EU began resettling small numbers of people. And I'm talking really small, like in the hundreds and then eventually into the thousands by like the total numbers. And out of the millions who were displaced just from Syria, and it was not good.
Wow.
Yeah, not a great chunk.
No.
But so throughout 2015, 1 million refugees reached Europe by sea alone.
Wow.
And by June of 2016, Turkey was ruled unsafe for Syrian refugees because of their lack of guaranteed human rights for refugees.
Wow.
Because there were so many people, Turkey could not guarantee human rights, basic human rights for all the refugees.
Wow.
There were rumors that they were kicking people back across the border, which Turkey denied, but, you know.
I mean, Erdogan is always sort of a...
Yes.
Can't always trust what he says.
By October, half of the world's refugee population lived in 10 countries. The top three being Turkey with more than 2 million refugees, Pakistan, 1.5 million refugees, and Lebanon, 1.15 million. So those 10 countries that accounted for 50% of the refugee population account for 2.5% of the world's GDP.
Wow.
Tiny section supporting huge amounts of people. Obviously, that causes a lot of problems.
Yes.
So first and foremost, the refugees put a really big economic strain on the host countries. They also often pose health risks because it can be very difficult. There's so many people, it can be very difficult to keep them all healthy. They also typically increase violence rates in their host countries for a number of reasons. There's, you know, not all of them are terrorists, obviously. Most of them are just people who are looking for a way to survive.
Right.
But oftentimes desperate people can get violent. Oftentimes there are people who are of different ethnicities or different religions who don't get along. And so for a large number of mixed reasons, violence typically increases in the host countries. So that is the timeline, which is now on the table. And then what about the Bible? What does it say in the Bible? That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have an answer.
Oh.
So, throughout much of the Old Testament, the Israelites were refugees themselves, right? And the book of Exodus tells the story of running away from an oppressive government at the behest of the Lord, so that they can go and live in another place. I mean, they're literally going through the refugee cycle.
Yeah.
And they lived in the wilderness for 40 years, living off of what God gave them, before finally settling in Canaan. They were refugees, basically. They didn't have a word for it, really, but they were refugees in the desert. So later on, the countries of Israel and Judah were taken over by Assyria and Babylon. Jerusalem was invaded, fell, and the inhabitants were subsequently shipped across the Middle East for various purposes. Babylon used them for a lot of things. Assyria used them for a lot of things. And they were once again refugees. And once again, were relying on God to give them what they needed. Eventually, Persia conquers Babylon. And then they let the Israelites go home. So that's sort of the history of the refugees of Israel. And so the law actually does make numerous references to the treatment of refugees and foreigners.
Really?
So yeah, actually, I'm not going to look them all up because I've got a number of citations here, and that would be quite a lot. But just a few: Deuteronomy 10:19, Exodus 23:9, Leviticus 19:3, and Leviticus 19:34. Don't just take my word for it. Go and look it up and make sure I'm not lying. I'm not lying.
Fact check him, please.
Fact check me, but I'm not lying. So, basically what they say is, be good to foreigners, don't abuse them, care for them, be kind to them, treat them like they're someone from Israel, treat them like they're one of your own. After all, you were also foreigners in Egypt.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's they talk about the treatment of widows and orphans, these sorts of things. And these people are specifically outed to be taken care of, and you should be kind to them.
Yeah.
So, another thing about refugees in the Bible, there was actually a number of haven cities in Israel, which has a different meaning now.
Yeah.
But haven cities at the time meant if you were convicted for a crime and you were innocent of that crime, you could go to a haven city and you couldn't be tried for it, basically. But by nature of being a place where a person would run away from a crime they didn't commit, you couldn't really screen them for much of, of whether or not they committed the crime. Once again, I do not have any numbers on crime rates or anything. These are old. I looked for them, but these are all ancient history.
Sure the abacuses are long
buried.
buried.
They're long buried and disintegrated. So there is a long history of the good treatment of refugees and the good treatment of foreigners. And we're going to take a brief cut because I think it was okay. Never mind, we're not going to take a brief cut. I said we're going to take a brief cut, and then I'm just going to look like a fool, and that's okay. All right. So, what do we do today? What does that have to do with today? That I didn't even talk about the New Testament. I was just talking about the Old Testament the whole time. Well, our outlook on individuals certainly shouldn't change. We should care for them like our own, and we should grant them the protections of our people. That is what God said to do. That is what we should do. There's no reason we should redact that one. That technically, while that is Old Testament law, and it's not the law of that we need to follow because Jesus fulfilled it. It's still, this is what God said was good behavior. Still good behavior.
Moralistic thing.
Moralistically, it's still good behavior.
And as well, sort of, it doesn't really relate to the sin that Jesus fulfilled.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it does not. But we should also treat them with kindness, not scorn.
Right.
And that's really how we should treat refugees. There's not a lot about how the government should treat refugees because that wasn't relevant. The government wasn't that big until when Jesus was around. They were dealing with the Roman government, which was very bureaucratic and very big. But Jesus was more concerned about explaining how you should treat people, and that falls in that same line.
Right.
Treat them like you would treat yourself.
Exactly.
Treat them with
kindness.
Respect. Respect. Kindness, not scorn. These are things that Jesus basically also repeated. Now, but what can we do, right? We have no control over the refugee influx, what people do with refugees. Well, now's time for an excellent plug. I have two organizations, actually, that I looked up and researched quite a bit on, and they're both really cool. Nationally, we've got the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. They were founded in 1939. So they've been doing this for a while.
Well established.
Yeah, they're pretty well established. Now, they are ELCA. They're not LCMS Lutherans. They're ELCA Lutherans, but they're still pretty cool. Well,
so you'll talk to them at the family barbecue, but you won't hang out with them.
Well, yeah, we'll talk to them. We won't hang out much, unless they brought the beer. In which case, we'll put that difference aside. But now, joking aside, good organization, and they maintain that because the Lutheran Church is actually an immigrant church, immigration is important. Refugees important. The organization basically aims to assist migrants who need help starting over in a new country. So they help settle refugees, and they're one of the few organizations allowed by the government to directly help refugees entering the country. So most people, when they come into the country, deal with the government directly, which is not fun.
No.
There are a list of 40-some organizations, I believe. It's either 40-some or 120-some, and I know those are two totally different numbers. So you'll have to fact check me on that one. But there are a limited number of organizations that the refugees can deal with, and most of those organizations are designed to make that easier so they don't have to deal with the government. This is one of those organizations.
Okay.
So they have resources for churches and ministries. So if you don't go to my church, you can still get resources for your church from them. If you just want to look at it, they're cool resources. So I'd highly encourage it. I'm going to put the link in the description. Check it out. I highly encourage that you check out the link and check out their website. It's very nice. Regionally, though, you can't really volunteer with these people, right? Those people are on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Can't really volunteer. Regionally, there's Lutheran Community Services. They're much broader. They do a lot of things because they're a regional organization, and so they can do more things in the area. They do health counseling, family and community support, disability services, welfare programs, crime victim services.
That's amazing.
They also help immigrants and refugees assimilate and learn skills that they'll need.
Refugees, too, also need a lot of those services, especially when starting out in a new place.
Absolutely. And so Lutheran Community Services does that right here in the Northwest.
That's great.
So if you're looking to volunteer in the field, they're a good one to go to. So they'll take help fundraising. If you can speak another language, they take English tutors. And if you don't have much time to donate, if you can only do a little, they'll take gardening the building. I looked it up. They will actually literally take gardening the building.
Wow.
Yeah, they'll take a lot. There is another link in the description to the volunteer page for that, so you can get started. They have nearby offices in Seattle, SeaTac, and Tacoma. So, not a far drive.
Excuse me.
And I highly encourage people to volunteer for these types of organizations.
They really sound like really amazing organizations.
They're great organizations. The organization that I usually volunteer for is an international organization, not a national organization. I work with World Vision a lot with the 30-hour famine. So there aren't a lot of ways that a regular person can help with the refugee crisis, but this is one way we can at least make a difference in somebody's life.
It's something local, it's something in your community. And I know for me, when I was in high school and middle school, I played soccer with a lot of African refugees and immigrants. And I know they use services like that, and every bit helps them if they are faced with such a tremendous struggle.
So please absolutely check those links out. If you want to help out, it would be great. Links in the description. And I think that's probably, checking the clock, yeah, that's all the time we've got for this week. And so that has been put on the table, and we will see you again next week with a totally new topic
To put
on the table. Hi, and thank you for watching that episode of Put It on the Table. If you liked it, go ahead and tell us so. If you have a question you'd like to ask, go ahead and ask it in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos just like it, go ahead and click that cross in the middle of the screen. Thank you again.